Okay, so here is Ixl skill BB8. So we have to remember what we were taught by how to factor quadratics. Everything we have to start with is factoring a quadratic, and then from there we do what we did in BB7 to solve it. Okay, so we have a quadratic, right? A is equal to 1. There is no GCF, right? Because we have a 1 over here, so we can't take an n out of everything. We can't take a number out of everything because we have a 1. Okay, so we know that we can factor this by making an x. We can say what are factors of 16, two numbers that multiply to be 16 that add to be negative 17. Okay, so you start listing your factors of 16, but you may know right off the bat that 16 and 1 equals 17, but both of them have to be negative, right? So in order to factor that, we would have n minus 16 times n minus 1. And remember, we now have this 0 over here, so we have this 0. So to solve it, we set this equal to 0. We set this equal to 0. We add 16. There's one answer. We add 1 to both sides. There's your other answer. You come up here, you write them in, 16, comma, 1. Okay, that's how you write the answers. You separate them with commas. Okay? All right, let's move on. So you got to review your factoring stuff or you're going to struggle with this a little. Okay, so on this one, n squared minus 37n equals 0. All right, it looks a little different because there's a number missing. What do we always do when we start? Write the problem down over here, n squared minus 37n equals 0. We always start by seeing if we can find a GCF, and in this case we can. We can take an n out. So we have n times n minus 37 equals 0. We set this equal to 0, so there's one answer. We set this equal to 0. Add 37 to both sides. And there's my other answer. 0, comma, 37. So if you're decent at factoring, okay, and if not, go back and review how to factor some of this stuff. But if you're decent at factoring, then these problems become pretty simple. Okay? All right. Now they do get a little harder. We're up at about the 50 level now on the program. All right. So on these, remember, we have a number in front. We have a number here. Can we take out a GCF? No, we cannot. Right? So we're going to write this problem down here again. 8z squared plus 10z minus 3. This is a factor by grouping problem. So we start with a times c is equal to negative 24. And then we say, what are factors of negative 24 that add to be 10, right? We're looking for 10. So what are our factors of 24? Well, we have, remember, it has to be negative 24. So we could write our factors, maybe I'll write our factors over here. So factors of negative 24, we have 8 and 3, right? And you might want to jump on that 6 and 4 because you know 6 and 4 equal 10, but one of them has to be negative, guys. So if you make the 6 negative, right? Oops. If you make the 6 negative, then you add them and you get negative 2. If you make the 4 negative, you add them and you get 2. So it can't be those. 8 and 3, 8 minus 3, 8 plus 3, neither of those make 10. But don't forget about 12 and 2, right? And we know 12 times 2 is 24. We know 12 minus 2 is 10. So we need the 12 to be positive, and we'll make the 2 negative. So there's my puzzle, right? 12 times negative 2 is negative 24, and 12 plus negative 2, or 12 minus 2, is 10. So now I have to rewrite this, right? We have it equal to 0. We have to rewrite it, factor it, and group it. So we have 8z squared. Instead of the 10z, I now write plus 12z minus 2z minus 3 equals 0. Group it. Factor it. What's the common factor here? 4z. What am I left with? 2z plus 3. I need over here now to be 2z plus 3, so I'm going to factor out a -1. That leaves me with 2z plus 3, and remember it equals 0. And then I finish my problem by saying 2z plus 3 and 4z minus 1. So a little harder to factor, right? And now I just have to set each of these equal to 0. Okay, so I'm going to say, let me do that over here. I'm going to say 2z plus 3 equals 0. There's one of my answers. And 4z minus 1 equals 0. That's my other answer. I just set this and this equal to 0. So I subtract 3. And I have 2z equals -3. Divide by 2. One of my answers is -3/2. So that would go right here. -3/2, comma. And then over here I would add 1. I have 4z equals 1. Divide by 4. Z equals 1/4. There's my second answer. Okay, so the only thing that makes that one harder is it's a lot longer to factor those, right? So again, if you're decent at factoring, then really we're starting, the only new skill you're learning, guys, if you think about it, right? We should know how to factor by now. The only new skill is how do I get from here, right, to here? That's the new skill, all right? And the way we do that, right, is we said 2z plus 3 is equal to 0. Then I came over here and I said 4z minus 1 is equal to 0, and I solved it. Okay? All right, last one. This is one from, actually, let's skip that one. That's another one just like that. Let's do this. Okay. So the reason this one is difficult, this was up from the challenge zone, is because it's not in standard form. We have to solve it and make it equal 0. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this equation and I'm going to subtract 6 from here, and I'm going to subtract 6 from this side. That'll make that a 0, which will equal -7n squared plus 43n minus 6. Now, I like this to be positive here, all right, because it's going to make a little bit of a difference. So I'm going to multiply both sides by -1. 0 times -1 is 0, okay? So let me write it down here. And if I multiply this by -1, I get 7n squared. If I multiply this by -1, I get minus 43n. And if I multiply that by -1, I get plus 6. The other way to look at that is you could just say, hey, I'm going to add 7n squared to this side, subtract 43n, I'm going to add 6, and I'm going to put the 0 on the other side. Okay, but either way, you end up with this. Now it is in standard form. Okay, and you can go ahead and factor it. All right, so I'll factor this a little different way. We'll do a guess and check method. All right, I know this has to be 7n, and I know this has to be n. Okay, and I know that this number here times this number here has to be equal to 6, right? So you could factor this by doing the a times c and do it out, but we might be able to figure it out just with the 6 and 1, right? Because I know that 6 and 1, if they're both negative, -6 times -1 is positive 6. -6 times 7 is -42. -1 times that is -1n. And if I add them together, I get -43n. So that's what you should get. If you do the A and C method and factor by grouping, you should get this same thing here. Okay, then you're just going to set them equal to 0. 7n minus 1 equals 0. N minus 6 equals 0. We're going to add 1 to both sides, and we get 7n equals 1. Divide by 7. Hold on a sec. Divide by 7, both sides. And I lost my pen. There we go. And n is equal to 1/7. So I know that's one of my answers. And then over here on this one, a little bit easier, we add 6 to both sides, and I get n equals 6. Okay, so there's my other answer. Those are my two solutions. Those are the numbers that if I put them in for n, I would get 0 for y, or I'd get 0 equals 0, which would be true. Okay, so watch those again. Make sure you understand how to do them, and keep plugging away on the BB7 and BB8 IXLs. Let me know if you have any questions. All right, it might take you a little while to get some of these, particularly if you got to work on your factoring skills. Thanks.